morning, everyone. Welcome to the Product Go Guarantee of Origin Cost Recovery webinar. My name is Jet Chong from the Clean Energy Regulator. We are about to kick off. We might just give it 30 more seconds as we've got a few more attendees just trickling in. All right, we might begin. So welcome again, everybody, and thank you all for joining us at today's Guarantee of Origin Hydrogen Cost Recovery webinar. My name is Jet Chong, for those that I haven't met. I'm a manager here at the Clean Energy Regulator for our strategic policy and analysis team, who are responsible for supporting the development and implementation of the Guarantee of Origin scheme, including arrangements on cost recovery. Before we begin, I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the many lands in which we are meeting and dialing in from today. I wish to acknowledge the Ngunnawal people as traditional custodians of the land in which I'm calling from, and recognise any other people or families with connection to the lands of the ACT and surrounding regions. I wish to acknowledge and respect the continuing culture and the contribution that they make to the life of this city and this region. And I would like to acknowledge and pay my respects to any other Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people who may be attending today's event. So before we begin with the webinar today proper, a couple of matters of housekeeping. So today's webinar on Guarantee of Origin cost recovery is scheduled for approximately an hour, with plenty of time scheduled at the end of the presentation for questions. The session today will be recorded, and links will be made available on the CER's website after today's session. Links will also be sent out to all registered attendees. In the webinar today, in order to manage the numbers, web microphones and videos will not be turned on, but there will be ability to submit questions for response during the question and answer section. In order to submit a question, you should have a Q&A function enabled at the top of your screen in the Teams function. You may open that Q&A and submit a written question for you to type questions and comments. You'll also be able to see other questions that people have submitted, and if there are any of interest that you would like to see addressed, please do feel free to upvote them, and they will move up the list of priority response. We'll do our best to get through the questions, but depending on the quantity, we may not get to them all. So any questions on the CRISTM not responded to during this webinar will be categorized thematically, and we will similarly make those responses available on the CER website after the fact. Any questions on broader matters of Guarantee of Origin policy will be addressed by our colleagues from the Department of Climate Change, Energy, Environment and Water, who are also present today. Moving on to a brief overview of today's webinar. The intent of the session today is to provide a brief overview of the Guarantee of Origin scheme for those who have not been so involved. And the primary focus of the session is to delve into the proposed cost recovery arrangements that will apply to the Guarantee of Origin scheme. In particular, the fees and levies for the hydrogen methodologies that are expected to be available within the first year of the scheme's operation. Presenting today will be myself from the Strategic Policy and Analysis team at the regulator, as well as my colleague Casey Broughton, who's managing our Product Guarantee of Origin team. We will also be supported by Sandra Williamson in my team, who will be referring questions for discussion during the Q&A segment. There are also, as noted, a number of members, colleagues from our Department of Climate Change, Energy, Environment, Water teams who are leading on policy development for the GO scheme, who will also be available for any broader questions that arise. Before we get started with the full detail of the discussion, I will hand over to Jane Wardlaw, a General Manager here at the Clean Energy Regulator, to provide some opening remarks. Thank you very much, Jane.
Great. Thank you very much, Jet, and welcome and good morning to everybody. We really appreciate that you have taken some time out of your day today to engage with us on this Guarantee of Origin cost recovery consultation. As you might be aware, the Guarantee of Origin scheme is commencing in the second half of this year. So we've been working closely with our colleagues at the Department of Climate Change, Energy, the Environment and Water, who are currently finalising some of the last key bits of legislation that we need to go live. And at the same time, the Clean Energy Regulator is working closely with the department to get ready to administer the scheme. So this is quite a sort of exciting milestone for us. We believe that the Guarantee of Origin scheme is going to become a key part of the Australian climate policy framework. It's all about supporting higher levels of transparency and integrity and supporting the development of low emissions product and energy markets. And if you've enrolled into this particular webinar, we're talking about hydrogen in particular today, as that will be the first product to be certified under the Guarantee of Origin scheme. Throughout this whole policy development process, stakeholder engagement has been a key part of the scheme's development, and it's greatly appreciated. And that's no different today when we're looking at the consultation to get opportunity to receive your feedback on cost recovery. So what is cost recovery? It's all about charging for the regulatory services to recover government costs. This is an important element of the scheme because it will support its long-term sustainability and its stability. So we know that that's got impacts on industry, and we're really keen to understand that we are going to get those settings right. Today's session is an opportunity to outline the proposed approach for cost recovery at a scheme commencement and to answer any questions that you might have about the cost recovery process. But this is just the beginning of the conversation. The Guarantee of Origin scheme will continue to evolve over time, and that includes the cost recovery elements. Because of this, it's important that there will be periodic reviews of the cost recovery settings as the scheme matures. So this is just the beginning. We really do appreciate all the views and engagement, and we hope that you find today's session valuable. And with that, I'll hand you back over to Jet, who can get us started on the detail.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Jane. So just briefly on the overview of the GO scheme updates. As Jane has flagged, the Guarantee of Origin scheme is on track to launch in the second half of 2025. Just for clarification, again, in terms of the roles and responsibilities, the Clean Energy Regulator will be the administering agency responsible for operating the Guarantee of Origin scheme, where our colleagues at the Department of Climate Change, Energy, Environment and Water, DCC-EEW, are responsible for overall development of the policy, including methodologies for calculating emissions intensity for various products. The purpose of today's session, as Jane has flagged, is to really engage closely on the cost recovery arrangements, which are currently out for consultation. Public consultation on those arrangements is available on our DQ colleagues Have Your Say platform. And excuse me, consultation is currently open and closes on the 18th of July for any folks who are looking to review and make submissions. In particular, we are seeking review on the draft cost recovery implementation statement, a document that sets out the proposed cost recovery arrangements for the Guarantee of Origin scheme. And we're certainly keen to receive feedback there, as they will be incorporated in the final arrangements for cost recovery proposed for the scheme. In addition to cost recovery matters, which are the focus of today's webinar, there is also broader consultation on the second tranche of subordinate legislation for the Guarantee of Origin scheme, including the rules and draft methodologies for the first product Guarantee of Origin methodologies. That's also available on the DQ website, with consultation closing at the same time on the 18th of July. So please do check those out if you haven't done so already. For those who are perhaps new, or it's been a while since you've engaged closely with the Guarantee of Origin scheme, just provide a very brief overview before I hand over to my colleague Casey to take us into more of the detail on the product Go side of things, which is where we'll focus our attention today. So very briefly, as a recap, the Guarantee of Origin scheme is intended to be a voluntary assurance scheme, and it's really designed and all about tracking and verifying emissions associated with the production of products such as hydrogen, and also certifying and verifying the production of renewable electricity. The intention as well is that the framework will be scalable and will be able to be expanded to certify other products over time. The value of a certificate scheme, a government-backed certificate scheme with high integrity, is it's all about helping our participants to transparently communicate and prove the attributes of products that they are producing and trading, helping to recognize and transparently communicate the attributes of low emissions products and renewable electricity to support the development of trade and decarbonisation, both within domestic and international markets. There are broadly two types of certificates which are covered by the Guarantee of Origin scheme. The first type, and the one that we'll be focusing on more today, are called Product Guarantee of Origins, or PGOs. So these certificates are based on tracking the provenance or origin of specific products. The certificates are proposed to be non-tradable. They will follow a cargo of product across its life cycle, and the intent is that they will cover the attributes of that product's life from cradle to the consumption gate. So that includes all of the inputs and emissions associated with the production of that good, how it was transported to its end destination, and who it was consumed by. The first cab off the rank that we'll speak about today is that the product goes will be intended to certify hydrogen, with the intention that the framework can be expanded to other products over time as other methodologies become available. The other part of the Guarantee of Origin scheme that we won't focus on so much today is our Renewable Electricity Guarantee of Origins, or REGOs. So these REGO certificates are tradable certificates that are intended to support renewable electricity claims, including for as inputs for product go certificate creation, so use of renewables in the production of low emissions products. The REGO certificates are intended to build on the existing Renewable Energy Target Framework, which is scheduled to sunset in the end of 2030, and in particular the large-scale generation certificate component thereof. REGO certificates will do a lot of the same things that the current LGC framework does in terms of certifying the production of renewable electricity, but will also expand them to also cover off production of renewables and storage renewables, as well as production of renewables from what we term below baseline generation, or in potentially in the future, aggregated systems once the appropriate methodologies are made available. There will also be additional functionality such as timestamping, which will help provide even more transparency and granularity to the renewable electricity market. So that's a very quick 101 of the overall Guarantee of Origin scheme. I will now hand over to Casey, who is the manager of our Product Guarantee of Origin team here at the regulator, to take us through a slightly more detailed look at the Product Go side of the scheme.
Thank you, Jet, and hello everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. My name is Casey Broughton, and yes, I'm the manager of the Product Guarantee of Origin section. So once we go live with the scheme later this year, my team will be administering the Product Go side of the scheme. So we will be responsible for assessing applications to register Go profiles and to register certificates. And we'll be undertaking assurance and the annual reconciliation checks. So my team will be the key contact point at the Clean Energy Regulator for Product Go scheme participants and for those looking to register. So this webinar is very timely to meet with you all and to begin engagement as we get ready for scheme launch. There'll be a slide right at the end of the presentation with some contact information on it, including the mailbox for my team. So take note of that if you've got any questions later on about participating. And as has been mentioned, the subordinate legislation for this scheme is not yet finalised. So I talk through kind of how we think the scheme will work. It's just really how we're expecting it to work given the consultation documents that have been published by our colleagues at the Department of Climate Change, and it's of course subject to final policy decisions. So this slide just gives a little bit of an overview of how we expect participating in the Go scheme will work. So like most of the other schemes that the Clean Energy Regulator administered, you would come in and enrol through our online services platform. And the first step in that first column would be to enrol as a registered person. And there'll be a form to do this in our online services platform. This is the entry point of the scheme and the point where a person's fitness for participating in the scheme will be checked. So your fit and proper person assessment. And by person, we mean like the legal definition, either an individual or an entity. So a hydrogen producing facility would be a person in this instance. So once you've been registered as a person in the Guarantee of Origin scheme, it's then you would need to register your profile. So for product Guarantee of Origin, there are 3 profiles that would need to be registered: production, delivery and consumption profiles. So we've moved into that green column, the second column. And again, there's forms in online services to allow registration to take place. So if we start with the production profile, this registration form really captures all of the static facility level data relevant to the production of the product, hydrogen in this case. And it would be submitted by the registered person who would be the facility operator. It would include information such as the facility location and ownership details, production method, energy sources, and emissions monitoring and reporting methods. The way the Guarantee of Origin scheme is designed is that the responsible person would initially set up a production profile containing quite a lot of static information. And this, the information that doesn't change frequently, and this helps kind of front load some of the reporting for the scheme. And that way, once it's time to register credits, you're only sort of providing batch information like quantities and times and things like that. It really helps the future reporting in the scheme become streamlined and efficient. So when my team will be assessing production profiles, we're really looking at a couple of things. We're looking to make sure that the registered person has demonstrated that the production process at their facility meets the eligibility requirements for the associated production pathway under the method. And we're also looking to make sure that no other emission sources, other those that are kind of captured in the methodology, can be attributed to the production of the product, hydrogen. And because the production profile kind of sets the foundational emissions accounting for the scheme, there's likely going to be a requirement for an audit at this point to support our assurances. There's 2 other profiles. So then there's the delivery profile, which will capture all of the information about the transport and storage of the product once it leaves the production facility. This can either be submitted by the hydrogen producer or by the person responsible for delivery. So there's a lot of flexibility in the scheme. It includes information such as where the product is delivered to. So that could be the place where it's consumed or where it's exported out of Australia if the hydrogen is being exported. The equipment used, again, emission sources and monitoring methods. And then the third one is the consumption profile. So this captures how and where the product is used. So facility details, how the product was used and any supporting evidence. And as I said, when we talk about consumption, it can also mean exporting the product overseas. It can cover single facilities or group consumption, like in a gas network. And this can either be, I guess, submitted by the end user or an intermediary, or could just, again, be submitted by the facility owner. So once you've created your production profile, then we move to the 3rd column. And the registered person who holds the production profile can now create certificates. So The certificates, as I say, will include batch information about how much of the product was produced, when and where, and the associated emissions intensity. Batches, there's again lots of flexibility within the scheme. So while one certificate for hydrogen will be 1 kilo of hydrogen per certificate, batches can be anywhere from 1 hour to 1 year of production. So there's lots of flexibility around how you report. So once you have included your production information into the certificate, and the post-production information is also included either by yourself or by the production profile holder to include the transport and storage emissions, you can then request that the Clean Energy Regulator register the certificate, and we'll check all the data before registration. And then the consumption information can be added by the consumption profile holder at the point the product is consumed. And then that will complete the life cycle data on the PGO certificates. And then if we're in that last column now, you can see where it says declare. That is our annual reconciliation check. So I spoke a little bit earlier around audits of the production profile. This is another important assurance point for the scheme. So the annual reconciliation check will check the accuracy and completeness of PGO certificates that are reported over the previous financial year. So it'll be a process that happens sort of July, August, September, following the end of the financial year. And we'll issue a summary of all of the PGO certificate activity that's been reported by the registered person during that year. And then the registered person will need to declare that the data is accurate. And if there's any review any conditions, or if anything has changed, that needs to be reported to us. If there's any errors found, that needs to be disclosed, that sort of thing. So we might do corrections or, take compliance action on certificates if needed. There'll also be an audit associated with the annual reconciliation process at the first and every 5 years. So, and the audits are really intended to verify the accuracy and integrity of the certificates through this process. And then you can make claims once you've got a certified product. You can, talk about its low emissions attributes. Next slide, please. So this slide just gives a bit of an example of the attributes that will be captured on a Product Go certificate. As I mentioned, a certificate is 1 kilo of hydrogen, and then they're batched up, and the batch of hydrogen will have all of the same production attributes. So there'll be some core information included on the certificates, including quantity, production date and location, facility information, the emissions intensity, both at production and post-production, and then the total kind of delivered emissions intensity. Information about electricity used, including the proportion from renewable sources, and whether any upstream LGCs or renewable electricity guarantee of origin certificates were used to create renewable electricity. Other sort of product specific attributes that will be included for hydrogen, in particular, things like pressure and purity, water sources, type and quantity of water used, particularly for hydrogen bioelectrolysis, as well as other sustainability features. The product guarantee of origin certificates will be housed in our unit and certificate register, and this information including other information about registered persons and profiles, will all be published on our public Guarantee of Origin register on our website once we go live with the scheme. Next slide. And here's just some more information about the methodologies. So products will only be able to be certified under the Guarantee of Origin scheme if they have an approved methodology. And currently the draft methodology that the Department of Climate Change have put out for public consultation is just for hydrogen produced via electrolysis. But methodologies for other hydrogen pathways like steam methane reforming and gasification, and for hydrogen carriers such as ammonia and liquefaction are also being developed by our colleagues at the department. And in addition, other methodologies for other products, some of which could use hydrogen as the production input, including broadly low carbon liquid fuels, green metals and biomethane are also being developed. And the department has included a time frame for scheme expansion as part of their consultation materials on the draft methodology. I'll also just quickly mention the hydrogen production tax incentive. So this is a tax offset that will support renewable hydrogen production, and eligible companies will be able to receive $2 per kilo of eligible hydrogen they produce. And this incentive will commence from July 2027. And as part of the eligibility for the hydrogen production tax incentive, companies will need to be registered under the Guarantee of Origin scheme and hold a profile and certificate and produce certificates under our scheme. And the certificates will need to identify that they're actually creating hydrogen with an emissions intensity lower than 0.6 of a kilo of CO2 or less. So there'll be more information coming out about that as we get closer to 2027. There is some information already on the ATO's website, but obviously we'll be putting more information about that as we get closer to the time. But as we do get closer to scheme launch later this year, there'll be lots more information on our website about participating in the Guarantee of Origin, so please look out for that. But I will now pass back to Jet to talk to you more about the cost recovery elements of the GO scheme. And there'll be time for questions at the end. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Casey, and thank you for providing that excellent run through of the product Guarantee of Origin lifecycle. As Casey notes, now we'll move to the cost recovery component of today's presentation. And so we'll run through the overview of the cost recovery arrangements, and then we will leave time to address the questions which are starting to come through the Q&A function. So thank you to all who have already submitted a question. So to begin with, I'll provide an overview of the product Guarantee of Origin cost recovery approach. And to start with, I'll just start with the question of what is cost recovery. So Jane mentioned this in her overview comments at the top of today's presentation, but cost recovery is the process by which the Australian government charges non-government sectors some or all of the efficient costs of conducting a government activity. So that is to say, the cost recovery is all about the government being able to recover the costs of implementing, in this case, implementing operations in respect of administering the Guarantee of Origin scheme. And the way that cost recovery is applied is set out in a document known as the Cost Recovery Implementation Statement, a standard document that's mandated by our colleagues in the Department of Finance that mandates how these costs are to be calculated and sets out how cost recovery arrangements will be implemented for the scheme. So as part of the Guarantee of Origin scheme direction from the government, the GO scheme was directed to be fully cost recovered over time, with cost recovery arrangements phased in order to facilitate scheme launch and the transition to the operation, sort of full-scale operation of the scheme. As noted, this cost recovery implementation statement, or the CRIS, is the key document here, which sets out the proposed arrangements for cost recovery, and that is available, currently out for public consultation and available on the department's website, and a link is available at the bottom, but you can feel free to have a look at the DQ consultation page. So cost recovery is a very critical element of the scheme. As Jane noted, it ensures that costs can be recovered to ensure sustainable operation over time. The way that costs are worked out, and therefore how the amount that needs to be recovered is calculated, is done through development of what we call a cost model. So the CER has developed a Go cost model, which is in line with the Australian government charging framework. The model is intended to capture the costs of administering and operating the scheme, and is based on the CER's prior scheme operational experiences and forecasts about the way that the scheme is intended to operate and projected uptakes and such. The outputs of the charging model we will detail a little bit later in this presentation, but you can also have a look at the Go CRIS, which sets out all of the proposed charges and the outputs of the charging model. So we will, in the next couple of slides, take you through a couple of the key elements of the proposed cost recovery arrangement frameworks. We do appreciate that cost recovery can be a little bit complex and impenetrable for those who are not so familiar to it. So hopefully the next couple of slides will serve to demystify some of the proposed operation of cost recovery and allow for further questions to clarify anything that hasn't been covered. Skipping a little bit to the end results, which we'll show through in the next couple of pages, one of the key elements of the scheme, and in line with that phase-in approach that was discussed a couple of points above, is that the charges for the product guarantee of origin methods, including for hydrogen, are proposed to be deferred for the first 2 years of the scheme's operation, and subsequently they will then be ramped up and phased in over time. The intent behind this proposed deferral is in order to facilitate participation by nascent industries, which aligns with some previous stakeholder feedback that was received in earlier consultations on the Guarantee of Origin scheme, and also acknowledges that a number of the industries which are seeking to be certified under Go, for example, hydrogen, are relatively nascent, and so the government is arrangements are intended to reflect that we don't want costs to impact the ability for the scheme to deliver effective outcomes. It will also enable the CER to continue to improve our cost modelling over time, our cost modelling and our cost estimates, by incorporating actual scheme data once the scheme has commenced in the second half of this year. As Jane also noted at the top, the Go cost recovery arrangements are very much an ongoing matter because they will sustain and operate throughout the life of the scheme. They will be subject to annual review and may be adjusted over time. So this is very much an ongoing refinement process. As noted, data collected from the scheme operation may be used in future revisions of the Go charging model and therefore the pricing arrangements that are proposed in subsequent years. So the upshot of all of that is to note that everything that's being presented here outlines the proposed charging arrangements for the beginning of the scheme, but there will be a periodic process by which the cost recovery arrangements for the Go scheme will be continually updated over time, communicated in a transparent fashion, and there will likewise be opportunities for engagement and feedback as the process develops. So please do anticipate that this will be the beginning of the scheme, but by no means the final word, and everything can certainly continue to evolve as the scheme matures. So over the next couple of slides, I will take you through a couple of the key elements of the draft Go CRIS that is currently available on the website for consultation. In particular, I'll touch on the points at which fees and charges are proposed to be applied to scheme participants. I will provide an overview of the phased-in approach and explain how that's intended to operate. And then I'll finally round off with the outputs of the charging model in terms of how much the regulator models costs for the scheme at scheme launch, as well as the proposed pricing, noting that the 2-year deferral discussed on fees. So to begin with, I'll start with a brief overview of where you might expect as a future scheme participant to have to provide a payment of a fee or a charge to the regulator for delivery of service. So this is the diagram which Casey stepped us through earlier in respect of the product Go lifecycle. As you can see, there are sort of 5 main charging points which are going to be relevant for payment of fees and levies for cost recovery. So the first one is over on the left, a fee for registration of a person. So that's fairly self-explanatory. In order to register as a person under the scheme, you will need to provide a fee associated with that enrolment process. The next one along is for a fee for registration of profiles, so production, delivery, and consumption. So as Casey noted earlier, these are some of the key building blocks of the scheme that collect relevant information about your operations in various parts of the supply chain. In order to make an application to register one of these profiles, you would need to likewise provide a fee to the regulator. The third charge point is the fee for certificate registration. So this is similar to the way that the Renewable Energy Target operates and the creation of large-scale generation certificates, but effectively in order to create and have the regulator verify the quality of a particular certificate, it's proposed that a fee would accompany that application in order to cover the costs of administering the certificate registration process. The fourth fee that you can see on the right is for the fee for addition of consumption information. So this is involved in sort of the tail end of the certificate when it's being consumed in order for the regulator to verify the accuracy of the supply chain process. So that's that sort of works hand in hand with the fee for the original certificate registration. Lastly, there is a broad-based annual levy that's intended to apply to recover the broad-based cost of scheme operation, and that's intended to be paid on an annual basis, and it would be charged on a per profile basis. So the holders of various profiles would be charged an annual levy that would be associated with the overall cost of scheme operation. So that hopefully provides an overview of the charging points which are proposed to operate for the Guarantee of Origin scheme. I might move to the next slide, which is a copy of a table which is presented in the draft cost recovery implementation statement. And this sets out the way that the phase-in approach to cost recovery is proposed to apply for the Product Go scheme. So what you can see here are a range of columns corresponding with products that receive methodologies in certain financial years. So for example, the product A column is intended to show the cost recovery arrangement that would apply to a method that's made in the 2025-26 financial year. Product B is for a product that whose methodology is made by the Department of Climate Change, Energy, Environment and Water in the 2026-27 financial year, and so on and so forth. As noted, one of the key phase-in approaches proposed for the Guarantee of Origin scheme is for the first 2 years of scheme operation to have cost recovery deferred. And so what you can see in those yellow boxes in sort of the top left-hand quadrant relates to 100% exemption or discount waiver being applied to all costs applied to methodologies made during these years. Thereafter, so from 2027-28 onwards, the proposal is that that discount will wind back, so beginning with a 90% discount and sort of decreasing year on year until full cost recovery is achieved in 2031-32 is the proposed approach at this time. So the intent here is that as the scheme matures, cost recovery will start to be introduced so that the market and participants become familiar with the payment points and incorporation of cost recovery arrangements from sort of 2027-28 onwards, and that this would then ramp up over time in order to achieve that full cost recovery, which has been part of the Guarantee of Origin scheme policy. So what you can see as well is that for products which are introduced in later years, so the methodologies are made available in 2028, 2029, so on and so forth, they will likewise propose to commence with a fairly significant discount, but that discount will obviously fall away fairly rapidly as we approach that full cost recovery period. And that just, again, reflects some of the nascent industry transition arrangements that are proposed to come into play, but while also aligning with the overall intent to achieve full cost recovery. So we appreciate that this table may be a little, may have been a bit difficult to interpret at first glance from the cost recovery implementation statement directly. So hopefully this explanation helps to translate the intent of what the waiver amounts table is conveying. Moving to the next slide, I'll touch now briefly on the outputs of the charging model and then finally the pricing arrangements for the scheme. So this table is also taken from section 3.2 of the draft cost recovery implementation statement. And what it shows here is the initial modeled costs of operation for each of the hydrogen methods which are considered for the first year of operation. So what these sort of raw numbers show you is that based on the charging model which the CER has developed, it generates certain costs associated with operating specific elements of the scheme for hydrogen electrolysis and hydrogen by SMR. And the variations that you see relate to differences in assumptions around the uptake and operation of these different scheme methods. We did also note that for the first financial year, hydrogen by liquefaction didn't return any results, and that was due to no sort of forecast volumes being used for that particular methodology. So just as a note, that's why that's been displayed as NA, but that's a bit of a modeling artifact for the first year of consideration. Now, the overall outputs of this charging model in this case will not be, it's not what will be charged to scheme participants, because as noted, the proposal is for a 2-year deferral to take place, but this is to explain that the numbers that you will see in this part of the draft CRIS reflect the outputs of the CER's charging model that has been developed to date. And as noted prior, the intent is very much that this model will be revisited over time as more and better scheme data is made available. And so you may very well expect that outputs of the model will not be constant, in subsequent years of cost recovery modeling, but will continue to evolve. That then takes me to the proposed pricing arrangements for the GO scheme, which, noting the 2-year deferral approach and looking at the hydrogen methods, results in no fees being payable for in the first financial year for any of the fee points which we discussed previously. So that includes registration of all of the profiles, registration of certificates, or adding consumption information to those certificates, or the annual levy for profile holders. So at present, all of those are nil for the initial scheme launch. I do note that there will be a fee charge for the registration of person, so that component of the scheme has not been exempt from cost recovery, and the proposed amount to register will be $490 in that first year of operation. I'll briefly now go to the next steps in the cost recovery consultation arrangements, and then I can see we've got a number of questions coming through, which we will then reserve the remainder of today's session for response. So in terms of next steps, as noted, again, the public consultation on cost recovery arrangements is open until the 18th of July, and so we do encourage everybody here to review the consultation documents and make a submission if so desired. Once that consultation period closes, the regulator will consider all stakeholder feedback provided on the draft CRIS, and the CRIS itself then will go to approval by the Minister, incorporating and acknowledging stakeholder feedback through this consultation process. And that will then land the sort of final positions for the initial year's cost recovery arrangements for the GO scheme. Cost recovery provisions need to be legislated, and so there are already provisions in the high-level Act legislation which allow for cost recovery to occur. So once the final arrangements are agreed, that will be incorporated in subordinate legislation which will underpin the scheme's operation. And before the scheme goes live, the final Guarantee of Origin cost recovery implementation statement will be published on the CER website, so that it will provide transparency on the full cost recovery arrangements that are proposed. So that's an overview of the cost recovery, proposed cost recovery arrangements for the Product Go scheme, particularly in the hydrogen space, and hopefully that has helped to provide a bit more insight or resolve some questions that you may have had about what is set out in the draft CRIS. We will now move to the section of our discussion, which is on question and answers, and you can see there's been a number put through. So yeah, I'll hand over to my team to pass the questions through, and we'll begin addressing.
Thank you, Jet. And thank you, everyone, the great questions that are flowing through. So we might go, probably I think this is a good first question to start with. It's been asked, where is it detailed in the consultation, the fee for certificate registration? In the exposure draft, there is only detail of annual fees. So I might just ask you, Jet, to respond to that one, please.
So so I think this might be a question around the legislation, and so this I guess might need to just test that this has been answered. But the cost recovery, there's a number of consultation documents that are out at the moment, and so the cost recovery implementation statement sets out the draft CRIS sets out the proposed cost recovery arrangements, including the fees and levies for all scheme participants in the GO scheme, which, as we've just outlined, for Product Go in the first year will be fairly negligible. As noted, then there will also be provisions in the legislation, so in the rules and the cost recovery charges regulations, which will set out the actual amounts in legislation once they've been agreed through the cost recovery consultation process. So in terms of the consultation for coverage of the fee for certificate registration, I would refer you to primarily the cost recovery implementation statement, the CRIS, which sets out all of the cost recovery arrangements. In context of the Product Go scheme, we expect that is proposed to be 0 for the first year, and you may see some placeholders in the draft legislation in respect of where further cost recovery arrangements will be finalised, but those won't be updated until the final cost recovery arrangements are established through the cost recovery implementation statement process.
Thank you, Jet. And I think that's a good segue into the next question, which again is sort of referring to the exposure draft. It shows the equations, but not the exact cost, with frequent use of to be advised. So when will the exact fees be published?
Thanks, Sandra. And yep, that likewise is a artifact of the legislation. The legislation will be required to give the cost recovery arrangements legal standing, but the numbers themselves will be finalised through the CRIS consultation process. So for now, I would advise that the CRIS is the source of truth in terms of the amounts that participants may expect to pay at the various charging points, and the legislation will be updated to reflect the final cost recovery arrangements once full consultation on the cost recovery approach has been complete and signed off.
Thank you, Jet. Next question. It looks like cost recovery is an annual fee. This was an earlier question. Unlike renewable energy target, so unlike the RET that has a fee per certificate, can you confirm there are no certificate fees for PGOs and REGOs?
Thanks, Sandra. So yep, hopefully that one's been covered in the walkthrough of the proposed charging points that was available a couple of slides above. And so no, to clarify and confirm that there will be charging points proposed for certificate registration, just as happens in the renewable energy target. In the Product Go space, there will also similarly be a fee proposed for the adding consumption information to certificates. So so please do refer to the relevant slide, and also the cost recovery implementation statement should set out fees for both of those activities.
Thank you. Next question. Will the phase in of costs after 2 years at that point increase the costs of PGO creations? And will this be expected to increase the price of PGOs? Will they become more expensive? And is this similar for REGOs?
Thanks, Sandra. So there's an interesting question here around the future market for guarantee of origin certificates and the impact of cost recovery on prices. From the regulator's perspective, I guess we'll note broadly that's in terms of the market's response, that's not something which we would directly have control over. So I can't comment to sort of the expectations on the effect on market dynamics with the introduction of cost recovery. I guess that in terms of the question of will it increase the cost of PGO creation, the answer to that would expect to be yes, because it will have gone from 0 cost to create certificates to a fee, noting that the 90% discount is intended to apply, so it should hopefully create a smooth transition. But in terms of the broad-based effect on the market, we're we're not probably well placed in order to speak to the direct impacts. There was a sort of ancillary part of that question about the application for the Renewable Energy Electricity Guarantee of Origin certificate. And for that, I will refer you to a webinar that we're holding tomorrow on the Renewable Electricity GOES, but the phase and approach for REGOES is a bit different. So there will be cost recovery arrangements in place from day one proposed for that part of the scheme.
Thank you, Jet. Next question. Why is the fee for electrolysis so much more than the fee for SMR?
Thanks, Sandra. So that relates to the couple of slides ago when we were showing the fees and the outputs of the cost model for the various hydrogen methodologies. And so I'll note that those are costs. So those aren't the proposed fees. Those are the costs that the model is returning for administration of the various elements of the Guarantee of Origin scheme. We note that, I guess, at the moment, the modelling is quite has to make a number of assumptions because the scheme hasn't yet commenced, and we also have limited information about the volumes of participants expected to enter. The model itself is quite complex. It's built in line with the Department of Finance and Australian government's charging frameworks and needs to consider a sort of range of different inputs and factors that result in an output. So the specific output of, in this case, electrolysis versus SMR is likely due to a it's an artifact of the way that the model's been constructed and certain assumptions that have been made. We're aware that these may or may not be very reflective of the actual operation of the scheme once it goes live, and that's very much part of the intention behind the ongoing revision and refinement of the charging approach. So once we have some real scheme data, we expect that discrepancy would be reviewed in future to see whether we truly do expect a difference in the costs between administering, say, a steam methane reforming versus an electrolysis project or not. And so that will very much be, those types of matters will be the subject of future reviews as part of that ongoing annual cost recovery review process. So for now, it's largely due to the outputs of the model that we have at this time, but we expect that will continue to be reviewed and refined in the future.
Thank you, Jet. And I'll just mention as well that there are some answers to questions that have been sort of dropped into the Q&A. So by all means, have a bit of a look too. There might be an answer to your question there. Next question, why is the annual levy fee the same regardless of the type of registration profile, whereas the registration profile costs differ depending on the profile?
Yep, thank you. It's a good question. So the purpose of the annual levy that's charged is in order to capture broad-based scheme operations that can't be ascribed to a particular application or process. So for example, things like education, compliance, maintenance of websites and communication materials and such are sort of done for the benefit of all participants and not for specific not sort of for the benefit of a specific person. And so the levy is intended to cover the broader costs of operating a scheme. So the approach, I guess, is that it's shared between all elements of scheme participation. That being said, that is an element which could be refined, and so if there are views on that, certainly welcome any submissions to that front. It's not sort of a hard and fast rule that it has to be universally divided, but given that it's sort of a broad-based approach, that's why the initial sort of even splitting has been proposed.
Thank you, Jet. Alrighty, so next question. So given that there is already a carbon intensity threshold, why distinguish between production method, electrolysis versus SMR, in costing? This seems to add unnecessary complexity to the system and means our industry development is hampered by tech preferences.
Yep. Thanks, Sandra. So to clarify, there is no carbon intensity threshold for the Guarantee of Origin scheme, any product which has an eligible methodology is very welcome to register in the scheme and will receive Guarantee of Origin certificates that will be with emissions intensities reflective of the product that's being produced. The 0.6 kilograms of CO2e per kilogram of hydrogen threshold only applies to eligibility for the hydrogen production tax incentive. In respect of distinguishing between the production methods, that is again an output of the way that the modelling has been undertaken, in which there are slightly different assessment processes that would be undertaken for say, for example, steam methane reforming versus electrolysis projects. That being said, the regulator is aware that for products that are operating in a similar, methodologies that are operating over a similar class of products, so for example, the various hydrogen methodologies, there may be streamlining advantages in sort of unifying the way that cost recovery is applied under those different technologies. And so in respect of future cost recovery settings, once cost recovery is not a zero value, that's something that could be regarded in respect of the choice of pricing that's applied and potentially unification of cost recovery arrangements for products of the same class or category. So it's the answer there is, yeah, it's currently distinct for modeling purposes. There may be pricing decisions taken in the future in respect of choosing whether or not certain prices are aligned in order to provide a more streamlined stakeholder and industry experience.
Thank you, Jed. All right. The next question: will the REGO aim to replace the LGC under the RET scheme post 2030?
Yep. So that's probably a broader question about the operation of the REGO certificate. The REGO scheme is intended to provide an enduring longer-term certification mechanism for renewable electricity in Australia beyond the end of the renewable energy target. So broadly, yes, the REGO scheme will be the framework for enduring renewable electricity certification.
Thank you, Jet. I just wanted to check something really quickly that we haven't already. Okay, so why is there such a difference between the annual levy for the PGO, set at 8,166, compared to the REGO, which was set at 1,014?
Yep. So thanks, Sandra. So that question, again, relates a bit to the outputs of the modelling. And so, as noted, the way that the model operates relies on a lot of assumptions that have been made about the way that the scheme will operate. In respect of what the model is showing in terms of the relative levies between the Product Go and the Renewable Electricity Guarantee of Origin, those figures are very much, I guess, an artifact of the way that the model has been operated, in particular because with the Renewable Electricity Guarantee of Origin, for example, we know that it's a more incumbent industry. There are more participants that are likely to commence earlier. And so when it comes to working through the annual levy and dividing sort of the costs amongst the participant base, the model may show, for example, a higher per participant levy to apply in the Product Go space, just because we may expect fewer participants in the early years. So these types of idiosyncrasies are potentially an artifact of the way that the data that the model has to rely on, and they're not, and they're sort of just reflecting the way that the model's been constructed in terms of how full cost recovery may be achieved. So these again will be refined over time, and so you can certainly expect that the levy modelled amounts will be updated over time as we get better information about the scheme participations across both Product Go and REGO.
Thank you, Jet. Now, I might actually throw to Casey for this next question. The emissions intensity ceiling of 0.6 kilograms of CO2 required to be eligible for the HPTI, is this per kilogram of hydrogen produced?
Yes, that's right. So to be eligible, you have to have a production emissions intensity of no more than 0.6 kilos of carbon dioxide equivalent per kilo of hydrogen. That's right. I don't know if everyone can see it, but I've just put in the chat a link to the information that's on the ATO's website as well, so people can have a look at that for more information.
Thank you, Casey. Now we have hit time. So I think we've resolved most of the questions, and any that we haven't, obviously we'll be providing responses to. So sorry, I'll hand back to you then, Jet.
Very good. Thank you very much, everyone, again for your time in today's session. And I hope it's been enlightening and a useful update on where the GO scheme is and the more details about the cost recovery arrangements that are proposed. So thank you all also for the very lively Q&A session, and I hope that it's helped to clarify the way that the cost recovery arrangements are proposed to operate in the GO scheme. We do have a number of contacts listed at the end of this PowerPoint. So if you do have any further questions that you weren't able to send through today, or if you have any coming out of the session, please don't hesitate to reach out to the corresponding teams. We've got, as discussed at the top, recording of this webinar will be published and made available to all attendees, and for any questions that were asked and that we weren't able to provide a response today, we'll also group those up and provide responses through that platform. So please do keep an eye out for that. Otherwise, thank you very much all for your time. We really appreciate it, and we look forward to hearing from you through questions and submissions. So thank you all, and have a lovely day.